3 hours after I gave birth, my mother-in-law walked into my hospital room, looked at my daughter lying against my chest, and refused to hold her. She did not say she was tired. She did not say newborns made her nervous. She did not even pretend to smile first. Celeste Whitaker stopped at the foot of my bed in her cream-colored suit, her silver hair pinned low, her leather purse still hanging from one arm, and looked at my baby like someone had placed the wrong child in the wrong room. Isla was 3 hours old. She had copper-red hair still damp from birth, gray-blue eyes that could barely focus, and a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark behind her left shoulder. She weighed 6 pounds, 11 ounces. She fit against me like a secret the world had not earned yet. I was still shaking from delivery. My legs felt far away from the rest of me. The room smelled like antiseptic, warm blankets, and the faint sweetness of newborn skin. Graham stood near the window with his sleeves rolled up, his shirt wrinkled from the night before. He had cried when Isla was born. I remembered that because I needed it to mean something. I lifted our daughter slightly and asked, "Would you like to hold your granddaughter?" Celeste did not move. Then she looked at Graham and said, "That child doesn't look like a Whitaker." No one spoke. Even the monitor beside my bed seemed louder. I waited for my husband to say it. "That's my daughter. Don't talk about her like that." Anything. But Graham only swallowed and said, "Mom, not here. Not stop, not apologize, not she's mine. Just not here." So I pulled Isla closer and smiled, because something inside me had gone very still. "She was born 3 hours ago," I said. "She doesn't owe this family a defense." Celeste's mouth tightened. What she did not know was that by the next morning, the child she refused to touch would expose the secret she had buried for 34 years. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet your phone battery is at 58% right now, right? If that's true, type 1. If not, type 2. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. 4 years before that hospital room, before Celeste Whitaker looked at my daughter like she was a problem to be solved, I met Graham in the back hallway of a women's clinic in Raleigh. I was 28 then, working as a nurse practitioner at a small obstetrics practice that served everyone from young mothers on Medicaid to women who drove in wearing diamonds and fear in equal measure. It was the kind of job that left compression marks around my ankles by noon and the smell of sanitizer living permanently in my sleeves. Most days, I ate lunch standing beside the medication refrigerator, answering portal messages between bites of whatever sandwich I had packed before sunrise. Graham came in because his family's company, Whitaker Medical Supply, was donating 2 portable ultrasound machines to the clinic. I expected a polished executive with a photographer behind him and a handshake ready for the local paper. Instead, he stood in the supply room listening to our oldest nurse, Carla, complain for 12 straight minutes about power cords that were always too short and screens that froze during appointments. He listened like it mattered. That was the first thing I noticed. Not his suit, though it fit him well. Not his watch, though I knew enough to know it cost more than my car. I noticed that he did not look at his phone while Carla talked. He asked where the machines would actually be used. He asked whether the exam rooms had enough outlets. He asked if the nurses wanted training scheduled before or after clinic hours, because, he said, a donation that creates more work isn't generosity, it's branding. I remember laughing at that. He looked over at me then, a little embarrassed, as if he had not meant to be heard. There was something gentle about him in that moment. Not weak, gentle. I did not know yet how easy it is to confuse the two when you badly want a man to be good. He asked me to coffee a week later after a community health fundraiser. Not somewhere expensive, just a narrow little place near the hospital where the tables rocked if you leaned on them wrong, and the coffee tasted burned after 3 in the afternoon. I liked that he chose it. I liked that he seemed relieved when I did not expect more. We talked for almost 2 hours. I told him my father had died when I was 16, and my mother had kept us afloat by doing payroll for a public school district. He told me he had grown up in a house where every room was beautiful and almost none of them felt comfortable. My family knows how to build things, he said, turning his paper cup slowly between both hands. They don't always know how to love them once they're built. At the time, I thought he was warning me about them. Later, I understood he was telling me the truth about himself. Still, I fell in love with him the ordinary way people do when they are tired of being careful. One dinner became three became weekends. He remembered the names of patients I mentioned only once. He brought soup when I worked late. He held my hand in parking lots without checking who might see. When his mother called, though, he always stepped away to answer. He never let her name ring twice. Even before I met Celeste Whitaker properly, I understood there was one woman Graham obeyed before he ever listened to himself. I noticed that too. I just did not let myself follow it all the way to its ending. I met Celeste properly 3 weeks later, at the Whitaker house in 5 Points, a neighborhood where even the trees looked like they had been approved by a committee. The house sat behind white hydrangeas and a brick walkway clean enough to make me check the bottom of my shoes before I stepped onto it. Graham squeezed my hand on the porch and said, "She can be particular, but she means well." I wanted to believe him. Back then, I still thought particular meant folded napkins and strong opinions about paint colors. I did not know it could mean a woman who could make you feel unwelcome without ever raising her voice. Celeste opened the door wearing pearls and a pale blue dress, the kind of outfit that looked soft until you noticed how perfectly nothing moved. She did not hug me. She leaned forward just enough for my cheek to touch the air beside hers. "Nora," she said, as if she had already read a file on me and found several sections incomplete. Dinner was served on white china, with a thin silver rim. Calvin Whitaker sat at the head of the table and spoke mostly to Graham about quarterly projections. Tessa talked about a donor luncheon for the foundation. I answered when spoken to, kept my napkin in my lap, and tried not to look as nervous as I felt. Celeste waited until the salad plates were cleared before she began. "So Nora, Raleigh-born?" "Mostly. My mother moved us here when I was 9. And your father?" I set my water glass down carefully. "He passed when I was 16. Her face softened in a way that looked practiced rather than felt. "How difficult. And your mother works?" "Payroll, for the school district." Celeste nodded, slow and delicate. Not disapproving. That would have been easier. She nodded the way people do when they are placing something on the correct shelf. Then Calvin asked what kind of medicine I practiced, and for 1 second, I thought the room might let me become a person instead of an application being reviewed. "Women's health," I said. "Mostly prenatal care, postpartum visits, family planning." Celeste smiled into her wine glass. "Meaningful work," she said. "Very hands-on, very humble." The word humble sat there longer than it should have. Later, in the kitchen, she handed me a small velvet box. Inside were pearl earrings. "Whitaker women are photographed often," she said. "It helps to look timeless rather than memorable." She did not ask whether I liked pearls. She simply assumed the family version of me would. I thanked her because I was raised to thank people for gifts, even when the gift came with instructions for becoming less of yourself. On the drive home, Graham asked if I thought dinner went well. I looked out the window at the passing porch lights and said, "Your mother is very careful." He laughed softly. "That's one word for it." But I was not trying to be funny. That night, I placed the earrings in my dresser drawer and did not wear them. I told myself it was because pearls were not my style. The truth was simpler. They did not feel like jewelry. They felt like a warning. I did not know then that Celeste did not only care how Whitaker women looked in photographs. She cared even more how Whitaker children looked in bloodlines. The first time Celeste asked about bloodlines, she did it over tea. Not in a dramatic way, not with accusation in her voice. That was never her style. Celeste could slide a knife between your ribs and still make everyone in the room think she was passing the sugar. Graham and I had been married a little over a year when I found out I was pregnant. It was a rainy Thursday in March. I remember because I took the test before work, set it on the bathroom counter, and then refused to look at it until the timer on my phone went off. Graham was still asleep. The house was quiet except for rain tapping the gutter and the soft hum of the bathroom fan. 2 pink lines appeared. For a full minute, I just stood there with one hand over my mouth. I had spent years telling other women to breathe through moments exactly like this, to let the news arrive before trying to understand what it meant. But when it was my own hand shaking around that little plastic test, all my professional calm left me. Graham found me sitting on the bathroom floor. He knelt in front of me, looked at the test, and started crying before I did. Not loudly, just one hand over his eyes, shoulders folding in like something inside him had finally loosened. "We're going to be okay," he said. I believed him because there are some sentences you hold on to, not because they are proven, but because the alternative is too heavy to carry. At 12 weeks, we heard the heartbeat for the first time, fast and steady, filling the exam room with a sound so small, it somehow made the whole world feel larger. Graham held my hand too tightly. I let him. Afterward, he bought a tiny yellow blanket from the hospital gift shop and kept it folded in the back seat of his car for days, like he was afraid admitting happiness too quickly might scare it away. Celeste's reaction was quieter. She did not scream. She did not clap. She opened her calendar. "When are you due?" she asked. "Mid-September," I said. "Which hospital?" "Raleigh Memorial." "Who is handling the delivery?" "Dr. Lillian Graves." Celeste nodded as if I had submitted paperwork in the correct order. At first, I told myself this was just how she processed joy. Some people cried. Some people planned. Celeste scheduled. But the questions changed by the second trimester. One Sunday afternoon, she invited me to tea at the foundation office. Graham was in Charlotte for a supplier meeting. I almost said no, but I was still trying then. Trying was something I had mistaken for goodness for a long time. The office was all pale wood, framed photographs, and fresh flowers that looked replaced before they ever had the chance to wilt. Celeste poured chamomile into 2 porcelain cups and asked whether my nausea had passed. Then she asked whether my mother had carried small or large. Then whether red hair ran in my family. "My mother's grandmother had red hair," I said. Celeste's hand paused over her cup. "Interesting." "Just that." Then came gray eyes. Birthmarks. My father's medical history. Whether anyone on my side had ever been adopted. Whether I knew every branch of my family tree, or only the parts people talked about at holidays. She framed all of it as prenatal caution. Every question wore the costume of concern, but underneath, I could feel something measuring me. When I told her a great-aunt had been born with a crescent-shaped mark behind her shoulder, Celeste looked out the window for so long that I turned to see what she was watching. There was nothing there but traffic, moving through downtown Raleigh. Finally, she smiled. "Whitaker features are usually very strong," she said. That night, I told Graham his mother was asking strange questions. He rubbed his thumb along the rim of his glass and said, "She just cares about family history." "No," I said. "She cares about proof." He looked tired then. Not surprised. Tired. "She's from a different generation," he said. I wanted to ask why a different generation always seemed to excuse the same cruelty in nicer clothes. Instead, I let it go. I was pregnant. I was exhausted. I was still foolish enough to think peace was something you could earn by staying quiet. After that, Celeste stopped calling the baby she. She called her the baby, as if a pronoun was too much commitment before the evidence came in. And when Graham and I told her we had chosen the name Isla, she set her fork down and said, "Pretty. Though not very Whitaker." I smiled because everyone was looking at me. But under the table, my hand moved to my stomach. My daughter kicked once, sharp and certain, as if she had already heard enough. Isla came into the world on a Tuesday morning at 5:18, after 9 hours of labor and one long night, where the clock above the hospital door seemed to move only when I stopped looking at it. My water broke at home just before 2. I was standing in the kitchen in one of Graham's old t-shirts, pouring watered-down orange juice into a glass, because Dr. Graves had told me to stay hydrated, when warmth ran down my legs, and every ordinary thing in the room suddenly became part of the last minute before my life changed. The humming refrigerator, the blue dish towel over the sink, Graham's shoes by the back door. Graham drove too carefully to Raleigh Memorial. He stopped at every yellow light. He swerved around every pothole like the city had hidden traps in the road just for us. "I don't want to jostle you," he said. I laughed once, then grabbed the handle above the door through another contraction. For most of that night, he was there. That is the part I still have to tell honestly. He counted my breathing. He fed me ice chips. He rubbed the heel of his hand into my lower back when the pain made language too small to use. When I said I could not do it, he leaned close and said, "Yes, you can. I'm right here." And he was. Until he wasn't. Isla was born with a cry so sharp and alive it cut through every machine in the room. Dr. Lillian Graves lifted her, slick and furious, and laid her on my chest. The second her skin touched mine, something inside me rearranged itself around her. She had copper-red hair, darker while it was wet, curling in tiny flames against her head. Her eyes opened for half a second, gray-blue and unfocused. When the nurse turned her gently to check her shoulder, I saw the crescent-shaped mark behind it. I thought it was beautiful. Graham stood beside the bed with tears on his face. "She's tiny," he whispered. "She's ours," I said. He nodded, but he did not say it back. I noticed. Even then, 3 hours later, Celeste arrived with Calvin behind her, and Tessa holding a white gift bag like a peace offering someone else had packed. Celeste did not ask how much pain I was in. She did not ask whether Isla had eaten. Her eyes went straight to the baby. I lifted Isla a little, careful of the IV in my hand. "Do you want to hold her?" Celeste looked at the red hair first, then the eyes. Then, when Isla shifted against me, the small crescent mark near her shoulder. Something passed across her face so quickly I might have missed it if motherhood had not already made every nerve in my body alert. "No," she said. "Just no." I tried to give her one more chance. "It's okay. I can help you." I said no. The room went quiet. Then she turned to Graham. "Before you sign anything else, you need clarity." I stared at her, waiting for the sentence to become less ugly. It did not. "That child has red hair, gray eyes, and a mark no one in our family carries." Graham's face went pale. "Mom, not here. Not stop. Not that is my daughter. Not apologize to my wife. Not here." I looked down at Isla. She was asleep, her mouth open slightly, her whole hand curled around nothing. "She was born 3 hours ago," I said. "She doesn't owe this family a defense." Celeste's eyes hardened. "Then, perhaps this family doesn't owe her a name." That was the moment something in me closed. Not broke. Closed. I pulled the blanket higher over Isla's shoulder and looked at the woman who had turned my daughter's first morning into a hearing. "Remember that sentence," I said. Celeste gave me a thin smile. "Postpartum emotion is not evidence, Nora." I looked past her to Dr. Graves, who was standing near the computer with her hands still on the keyboard. "No," I said quietly. "But hospital records are." After Celeste left the room, Graham stayed for 9 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the door instead of watching him. It was easier that way. He stood near the foot of my bed, one hand at the back of his neck, his eyes moving from Isla to the hallway and back again, like there was an answer waiting somewhere outside the room, if he just avoided looking at me long enough. "I need to handle a few things downstairs," he said finally. I did not ask what things. A man who cannot defend his newborn daughter from his own mother does not suddenly become brave in an elevator. He leaned down like he might kiss my forehead, then thought better of it. Or maybe I moved. I honestly do not remember. I only remember Isla making a small sound in her sleep, and the way my whole body responded before my mind did. Graham left. The door clicked shut behind him. For a while, I just sat there with my daughter against me, and let the silence show me what it had been trying to say for years. Graham loved peace more than truth. He loved being seen as kind more than doing the kind thing when it cost him something. And I had mistaken his softness for safety because I wanted a soft place to land. My sister June arrived a little before 11 that night. She had driven from Durham in the hoodie she slept in, her hair twisted into a knot, a paper bag from a gas station in one hand and my spare phone charger in the other. She did not come in crying. She did not make the moment about her shock. She walked straight to the sink, washed her hands, looked at Isla, and then looked at me. "What do you need first?" she asked. That was when I cried. Not loudly. Not the kind of crying people write songs about. Just a quiet breaking open, because someone had finally asked a question that did not require me to defend myself. June took Isla so I could drink water with both hands. She checked the whiteboard for my nurse's name. She asked when I had last had pain medication. Then she sat in the corner chair with Isla tucked against her shoulder, like she had been born knowing exactly where to fit. Only after that did she ask what happened. I told her every word I remembered. June did not curse. She opened the small notebook she carried from her social work days and wrote it down. Ode. 102A. Media Celeste entered. Refused to hold baby. Questioned paternity. Graham said. Mom. Not here. Dr. Graves present. A woman who just gave birth, June said, still writing. Doesn't owe anyone a courtroom defense from a hospital bed. Then she looked at me. But if they're trying to build one around you, we keep records. Somewhere after midnight, while Isla slept in the bassinet and June guarded the room from that stiff final chair, I remembered the attorney who had been calling me for weeks about my grandfather's old business papers. Maren Holt. I had ignored the calls because pregnancy had made everything feel too full already. June held out my phone. Then in the morning, she said, "You call her first." I woke before dawn to Celeste's voice in the hallway. At first, I thought I was dreaming it. The room was dim except for the thin blue light from the monitor, and Isla was asleep in the bassinet with both fists tucked near her face. June had finally dozed off in the chair, one arm folded over her notebook like she expected someone to try taking it. Then I heard Celeste say, "I am not asking you to falsify anything." My eyes opened. The door was not fully closed. Through the narrow gap, I could see a slice of the hallway, polished floor, pale wall, the edge of Celeste's cream sleeve. Her voice was low, controlled, the way wealthy people speak when they want pressure to sound like patience. "I am asking whether certain paternal information can remain pending until the family has clarity," she said. There it was again. Clarity. The clean word she kept using to hide the dirty thing underneath it. A younger woman answered, nervous. Someone from administration, not one of my nurses. "Mrs. Whitaker, newborn records cannot be adjusted based on a grandparent's concern." Celeste gave a soft laugh. "Concern is not the issue, accuracy is." I sat up too quickly and felt pain pull through my abdomen. My hand went to the rail of the bed. I did not speak. Not yet. Dr. Lillian Graves appeared in the hallway, her white coat moving into that narrow slice of view like a door closing. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, calm as stone. "No one changes a newborn's records because a grandparent is uncomfortable with hair color." Silence. Then Celeste's voice sharpened by 1 degree. "Doctor, our foundation has supported this hospital for years. I hope everyone understands how delicate this situation is." June was awake now. She did not move fast. That was one thing her years in social work had taught her. Sudden movement makes powerful people pretend they are the victims. She picked up her pen and began writing. Dr. Graves did not raise her voice. "And I hope everyone understands," she said, "that donor history does not influence patient records in my ward." That was the first time I heard Celeste lose half a breath. A few minutes later, she walked into my room holding a white gift bag. Graham followed behind her, looking like a man who had been awake all night and still managed not to learn anything. Celeste placed the bag on the table beside my water pitcher. Inside was a folded baby blanket, ivory, expensive, soft enough to make the cruelty of it worse. Embroidered in silver thread were 2 words. Baby Whitaker. Not Isla. Names can be corrected later, Celeste said. I looked at Graham. Is our daughter's name an emotional decision too? His mouth opened, closed. Then he said, I just think we should get through today. And there it was. Today. The place cowards hide every decision they do not want to make. Celeste sat without being invited. Families like ours survive because someone is willing to ask ugly questions. I looked at the blanket, then at my sleeping daughter. Maybe, I said. But sometimes ugly questions come from ugly secrets. Celeste's face changed. Only for a second. But it was enough. Celeste left after that. But she did not take the blanket with her. It stayed on the table beside my water pitcher, folded so neatly it looked less like a gift than a document waiting for a signature. Baby Whitaker. 2 words in silver thread. No name, no person. Just a place being held open until the family decided whether my daughter was allowed to occupy it. At 9:13 that morning, with Isla asleep against my chest and June sitting beside me with her notebook open, I called Maren Holt. She answered on the second ring. Nora, she said, not surprised, not rushed. Are you safe? It was such a simple question that for a second, I did not know how to answer it. I looked at the hospital door. I looked at the bassinet. I looked at the place where Graham had stood and failed us in a way no apology would ever fully cover. I don't know anymore, I said. Maren was quiet for one breath. Then tell me what happened. So I did. I told her about the hospital room. Celeste refusing to hold Isla, the questions about hair and eyes and a mark on my baby's shoulder. I told her Graham had said not here instead of no. I told her about the hallway conversation June had written down, the word pending, the mention of the foundation, the way Dr. Graves had stepped in before Celeste could dress interference up as concern. Maren did not interrupt. I could hear paper moving on her end, then the soft click of a pen. When I finished, she said, your grandfather's file just became relevant. My grandfather, Arthur Bellamy, had been dead for 6 years. To me, he was Sunday lunches, peppermint tins in his truck console, and a laugh that always came with one hand pressed to his chest. I knew he had run a small medical logistics company before I was born. I knew it had been absorbed by something larger. I did not know it had left anything behind that could matter in a hospital room where my daughter had been treated like a question mark. Maren explained it slowly. Years ago, Whitaker Medical Supply had purchased most of Arthur's regional distribution network, but not all of his interest in it. He had kept a 9.5% stake in the logistics division, along with an old voting agreement that gave his heir the right to request an internal ethics review if a Whitaker executive, board representative, or affiliated foundation officer created risk involving hospital contracts, patient records, or donor influence. I stared at the wall while she spoke. The wall had a framed print of a field in spring, soft green and yellow, the kind of art hospitals choose because no one can object to it. I remember thinking how strange it was that my grandfather, a man who used to peel apples with a pocket knife at my mother's kitchen table, had somehow left me something sharper than anyone in that room expected. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Maren said, that if Celeste used her foundation's relationship with Raleigh Memorial to pressure staff about your daughter's records, this is no longer only a family issue. June looked up. Maren continued. Whitaker Medical Supply is finalizing a major regional contract. $42 million, if my information is current. Compliance will not enjoy learning that the family's public health foundation may be treating hospital records as negotiable. I should have felt relief. I did not. All I felt was the weight of Isla breathing against me and the awful exhaustion of realizing the people who called themselves family had made paperwork necessary before my daughter was even a day old. I don't want revenge, I said. I just want them to stop treating her like she has to prove she belongs. Maren's voice softened, but only slightly. Then we don't start with revenge, she said. We start with records. Before we hung up, she paused. There is one more thing, she said. Your grandfather asked me years ago to keep an eye on the Whitakers. He never explained why. He only said people who talk the loudest about clean bloodlines are usually afraid of their own paperwork. I looked down at Isla's small sleeping face. For the first time since Celeste had walked into that room, I wondered if the secret she was so desperate to find in my child had never belonged to my child at all. The notification came at 10:40 that morning, while I was trying to learn how to change a diaper with one hand and keep my hospital gown from slipping off my shoulder with the other. Isla was less than 30 hours old. She hated being cold. She hated having her legs lifted. She hated the world, apparently, and announced it with a red-faced outrage so pure that June laughed for the first time since she had arrived. "That's not crying," she said, handing me a wipe. "That's a formal complaint." My phone buzzed on the rolling table beside the bed. I almost ignored it. Everything outside that room felt distant and rude, but June glanced at the screen and went still. "Nora," she said. There was a tone in her voice I had heard only a few times before, back when she was still doing social work and a name on a file had turned a bad feeling into something documented. I picked up the phone. The notification was from a genetic ancestry database I had used 2 years earlier, not for family secrets, but for health history. My father had died young, and I wanted to know what risks might be sitting quietly in my blood before I became a mother. Graham had done a similar executive wellness screening through his company and linked his results months later because, back then, we were still the kind of couple who shared passwords and thought transparency meant safety. The message was simple. New close family match identified. At first, I thought it was mine. Then I saw Graham's name. Match level, half-sibling. Name, Rowan Pike. A. Fille autre dive. Location, Asheville, North Carolina. For several seconds, I did not understand what I was reading. My mind kept trying to turn the words into something smaller. Cousin, distant relation, lab error, anything but what the screen clearly said. Half-sibling. June sat down slowly beside me. "Graham has a brother?" she asked. I looked toward the door, as if the answer might walk in wearing an apology. "Not one he knows about," I said. I sent the screenshot to Maren with hands that had started shaking again. Not from delivery this time. She called back 11 minutes later. "Rowan Pike was born June 4th, 1990, she said. "A private clinic in Virginia. The original records are incomplete." Virginia. I remembered Celeste looking out that foundation office window when I mentioned the crescent-shaped birthmark in my family. I remembered her face in the hospital room when Isla's shoulder turned toward the light. Not disgust. Not exactly. Recognition. Celeste was in Virginia that summer, Maren said. Publicly, she was recovering from exhaustion before her engagement to Calvin. The room seemed to narrow around me. Red hair. Gray eyes. The mark. Celeste had not looked at my daughter and seen a stranger. She had looked at my daughter and seen a door she thought she had locked 34 years ago. Maren found Rowan first, but Tessa found the money. That was the strange thing about old secrets. They did not usually come apart because one person suddenly decided to confess. They came apart because too many people had been asked to carry one small piece of the lie, and eventually someone opened the wrong drawer. Rowan did not answer Maren's first call. He answered the second one from the parking lot of an urgent care outside Asheville, still in his paramedic uniform, with an ambulance backing up somewhere behind him. Maren did not tell him everything. She only said there might be information connected to his biological family, and that she would not share his name with anyone unless he allowed it. There was a long silence. Then Rowan said, "I've been looking for 30 years. He had been adopted through what his late mother once called a private arrangement. No agency name, she would repeat. No clear paperwork. Just a sealed file, a rewritten birth certificate, and the understanding that some questions made the adults in his life suddenly busy. He sent Maren what he had. A birth date, a clinic name in Virginia, a photograph of himself at 25, standing beside a fire truck with copper in his hair and a small crescent mark visible above the collar of his shirt. When Maren forwarded the photo, I had to sit down, even though I was already sitting. He did not look like Graham exactly. Not enough to make it simple. But he had the same set to his jaw, the same gray in his eyes, and something in his expression I had seen once before on Celeste's face when she was trying not to be afraid. Across town, Tessa Whitaker was trying to save her mother. At least, that was what she told Maren later. The ethics review had reached the foundation office by then, and Tessa went into the archived files looking for anything that proved Celeste had been in North Carolina the summer Rowan was born. Something clean. Something documented. Something that would let all of them call this a misunderstanding. Instead, she found an old scanned ledger from 2007 when the foundation digitized decades of paper records. Buried under donor reimbursements and clinic grants was a payment marked Private Relocation Assistance. $18,700. Beside it were 2 initials and 1 last name. B. Langford. Maren knew what to do with a name like that. By the next afternoon, she had found Beatrice Langford in Roanoke, 76 years old, retired, still living in a yellow house, with plastic flamingos in the yard, and a memory sharper than anyone had paid her to keep. At first, Beatrice refused to talk. Then Maren sent her a photograph of Isla's birthmark, with my permission. Beatrice called back in 6 minutes. "I saw that mark once before," she said, "on a baby boy born in June of 1990. The mother had used a different name. Young, elegant, terrified." A lawyer came 2 days later. Cash changed hands. The file was corrected. But Beatrice had kept a handwritten note because, in her words, rich families don't bury things themselves. They hire ordinary people to hold the shovel. By the time Maren finished telling me, Isla was asleep against my shoulder. The woman who had refused to touch my daughter because she did not look like a Whitaker had once given away a son who looked too much like the truth. The board review happened 8 days after Isla was born, in a glass conference room on the 11th floor of Whitaker Medical Supply. I was not required to attend. Maren told me that twice. June told me once, then stopped, because she knew I had already decided. So I arrived wearing a loose black dress that still hurt where the waistband touched me, with Isla asleep in a carrier against my chest and every eye in that room pretending not to look at her. Celeste looked flawless. Navy suit, pearls, hair pinned low. The same calm face she had worn in my hospital room, as if cruelty was just another form of etiquette if you stood straight enough while delivering it. Ellis Vaughn, the board member responsible for compliance, opened with no drama. That made it worse. He did not ask who had hurt, whose feelings. He asked whether a foundation officer had attempted to influence hospital records, whether donor status had been mentioned to medical staff, whether a newborn's legal identity had been treated as conditional during an active hospital partnership negotiation. Celeste Whitaker. "I was protecting my son from a potentially fraudulent situation," she said. Maren placed Dr. Graves's statement on the table. "And in doing so," Maren said, "you appear to have treated patient records as negotiable." Celeste's smile thinned. "This is a family matter being exaggerated by an emotional postpartum woman." I felt June shift beside me, but I did not speak. Maren opened another folder. "Then perhaps we should discuss why Mrs. Whitaker has a documented history of treating newborn records as negotiable." For the first time, Celeste stopped moving. Maren did not turn Rowan into a spectacle. She did not say more than he had allowed. She presented only what mattered. The Virginia clinic, the altered file, the payment marked Private Relocation Assistance, Beatrice Langford's handwritten note, and the existence of an adult son whose original records had been buried before Celeste married Calvin. Calvin stared at his wife like he was seeing a stranger wearing familiar jewelry. Graham looked at the table. Tessa cried without making a sound. Celeste finally said, "That was before this family." I looked down at Isla, sleeping through the sentence that had almost erased her. "So was she," I said quietly. "According to you." Celeste turned toward me. "You had no right." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because some people only discover the language of rights when their own secrets are being handled. "Neither did you," I said, "but you did it anyway." Ellis closed the folder in front of him. Celeste would step away from the foundation and all hospital partnership activity pending review. The $42 million contract would proceed only if she was removed from public representation. Afterward, Graham caught me near the elevator. "Did you plan this?" he asked. "No," I said, adjusting Isla's blanket. "Your mother did. I just stopped letting her call it family." The review did not end Celeste in one clean afternoon. Real life is rarely that generous. There were follow-up calls, revised statements, attorneys who used words like reputational exposure when they meant shame, and family meetings I did not attend because my body was still healing and my daughter was still learning the difference between hunger and loneliness. Celeste stepped down from the foundation, temporarily, which in Whitaker language meant no one was ready to admit she had been removed. Her photograph disappeared from the hospital partnership announcement. That told me more than the press release ever could. Graham asked to come by when Isla was 3 weeks old. I let him see her at June's house, with June in the kitchen pretending not to listen, and absolutely listening. He held Isla awkwardly. Like love was something fragile, he was afraid to drop after already dropping it once. He apologized. I believed he was sorry. I did not believe sorrow was the same thing as change. "I should have stopped her," he said. "Yes," I told him. "You should have." That was all I gave him. Maren set up Isla's trust before the end of the year, funded through the settlement and the old Bellamy stake my grandfather had left behind. $3.8 million, protected from Graham, from Celeste, from anyone who believed money, gave them the right to rename a child. I signed the papers with Isla asleep beside me in her car seat, one sock missing, her red hair sticking up after a nap. Rowan and I met once in Durham. He did not want a scene. Neither did I. He was kind, tired around the eyes, and quieter than I expected. When he saw Isla's crescent mark, he smiled in a way that hurt to look at. "Maybe this time," he said, "no one has to hide it." I think about that often. Isla is older now. She laughs with her whole body. Her hair catches sunlight like copper wire, and when she sleeps, one hand still curls near her face, the way it did in the hospital bassinet. Sometimes I remember Celeste stepping back from her. Sometimes I remember Graham saying "not here," but those memories do not own the room anymore. Every night, I tell my daughter the same thing, even though she is too young to understand it. People may question your name, your blood, your place at the table. They may refuse to hold you because your existence reminds them of something they buried, but that does not mean you are missing anything. Sometimes winning is not making them suffer the way they made you suffer. Sometimes winning is carrying your child out of the room where she was asked to prove she deserved to be loved. What I learned from all of this is that family is not proven by a last name, a bloodline, a wedding ring, or a place at a polished dining table. Family is proven in the moments when someone is vulnerable enough to need protection and someone else chooses to show up. It is easy to love people when everything looks respectable. It is easy to smile in photographs, sign holiday cards, make speeches about legacy, and talk about what a family stands for. The harder test comes in hospital rooms, in quiet hallways, in the first few hours, after a life has changed forever. That is when people reveal whether they love you, or whether they only love the version of you that makes their image easier to maintain. Nora's story reminds us that cruelty does not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it arrives dressed well, speaking softly, using words like concern, clarity, reputation, and tradition. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are not the ones who openly attack us, but the ones who ask us to shrink, wait, understand, stay quiet, and keep peace while they decide whether we are worthy. But love should never require a newborn child, a tired mother, or any wounded person to prove they belong. There is also a deeper lesson here, about resilience. Nora did not win because she was loud. She won because she stayed steady. She paid attention. She accepted help. She kept records. She let the truth do what anger alone could not. That kind of strength is not dramatic from the outside, but it is powerful. Sometimes healing begins the moment we stop begging the wrong people to choose us. And maybe the most important lesson is this. The next generation should not have to inherit our silence. If a family system is built on fear, secrets, favoritism, or control, someone has to be brave enough to step out of the room and say, "This ends with me." Isla did not need Celeste's approval to be loved. Nora did not need Graham's courage to become strong. And we do not need acceptance from people who only value us when we fit the story they want to tell. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to protect your peace from someone who called their control family? I would really love to hear your thoughts. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for the next story.